A female police officer was trapped inside an overturned SUV, her breath thin and breaking, and blood covered her face in a way no one should be found. When Raymond reached her, the dust was still settling. Her eyes fluttered, barely holding on, and Max slid under the crushed frame as if he could lend her his own strength. A soft whisper came from her cracked lips. "Don't. Leave me." They pulled her out just before the leaking fuel caught the night air. But survival was only the beginning. As Raymond carried her down the ravine, Max suddenly froze. Ears forward, body locked. Someone was watching. Not a threat. Not yet. A few minutes later, from behind two boulders, a young boy stepped into the moonlight. Clothes torn, face dusty, eyes far older than 12, and with a voice that barely reached the cold air, he said, "They left me when the truck fell." Raymond realized then that the crash wasn't the whole story. It was the start of something darker following their trail. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The night did not ease into silence. It fractured. Something struck the ridge with a violence that didn't belong to any ordinary hour. A metal scream swallowed too quickly by the desert air. It was the kind of sound that makes the body react before the mind understands. And Max was already upright, muscles taut, ears cutting the darkness like blades trained on a single unseen point. Raymond stopped mid-step, every instinct he once carried into war returning uninvited, cold and immediate. He reached for the doorknob without knowing why, only certain that the dog beside him had just recognized the shape of danger. A burst of static crawled across the radio on the counter, a hiss that did not form words, only the raw rhythm of someone fighting for breath. Raymond turned slowly, as if afraid any sudden movement might snap the connection. The lamp flickered. The wind held its note. Then, like a thread pulled through the speaker, a voice barely strong enough to claim existence trembled into the room. "Officer down. Please." The sentence broke apart on its way out. Softer than the scrape of dust on glass, Max moved first. He lunged toward the door with a pull so fierce Raymond had to brace his feet against the floor. There was no hesitation in the dog's body, no confusion, no fear, only direction. It reminded Raymond of the men he once followed through smoke and rifle fire, men who acted before thought could slow them, men who understood that seconds could carve the line between life and loss. He forced his boots on with hands that didn't feel steady, and every heartbeat pressed urgency further into his ribs. The night beyond the door waited with a strange stillness, as if holding something it did not wish to reveal. When Raymond stepped outside, a thin cloud of dust drifted across the ground, unsettled by some recent violence. He moved forward, Max pacing at the end of the leash like a compass needle that had just found true north. The dog paused, lowered his head, and inhaled deeply, the way an animal does when it detects the difference between fear and mortal danger. The air was sharp with the smell of scorched rubber. Raymond followed the scent line downward. There, etched across the sandy earth, were deep tire grooves, fresh enough that the edges hadn't yet crumbled. They slashed their way toward the ravine as though a vehicle had been dragged by something larger than itself. Just beyond the point where the tracks broke off, pieces of shattered gravel still rolled from the ledge, unsettled. Raymond's breath tightened, and he leaned forward with a caution he hadn't felt in years. His eyes found a small, half-buried glint among the dust. He knelt, brushed the dirt aside, and uncovered a badge, Border Patrol issue, still warm, almost pulsing with the ghost of the hand that had lost it. Max halted so abruptly that Raymond nearly collided with him. The dog hung his nose above the badge but didn't touch it, breathing slow and deliberate, absorbing every truth the object carried. Raymond watched the rise and fall of Max's ribs, the stillness of his tail, the focus in his eyes. Something had happened within moments, close, violent, and deliberate. He scanned the rim of the ravine and saw nothing but darkness swallowing the world below. The radio in Raymond's pocket crackled again, not with words, but with the broken cadence of someone drifting in and out of consciousness. He wanted to respond, but instinct warned him that any sound might break whatever fragile tether remained between them and the person still clinging to life somewhere beneath that drop. He stepped toward the edge and listened, not with his ears, but with the part of his soul that had learned, long ago, to sense the presence of someone who hadn't given up yet. The desert felt strangely alert, as if the land itself recognized the weight of what had just unfolded. The night breeze shifted, carrying with it the faint scent of gasoline and dust disturbed by sudden motion. Raymond felt the old ache in his shoulder, the one born of shrapnel and years, press forward as memories collided with the present. He forced them back. Now was not the moment to revisit the ghosts of old battles. The only thing that mattered was the life suspended somewhere in the darkness beneath them. Max crept closer to the ledge, lowering himself inch by inch, as if trying to hear the heartbeat of the canyon. His body moved with a grace Raymond had only seen in trained dogs on deployment, creatures who understood that sound travels differently when death is nearby. The dog exhaled once, slow and controlled, and nudged the soil with the edge of his paw. Then he froze. Raymond followed Max's gaze and saw nothing at first, only shadows layered upon shadows. But the longer he looked, the more he sensed a presence, faint yet insistent, like a spark waiting to be noticed. It struck him then how strange it was that a creature with 4 legs could still teach a grown man how to trust the instincts he once lived by. He rested a hand on Max's shoulder, feeling the tightness of muscle coiled beneath his fingers. The dog did not look back at him. His entire focus was swallowed by the ravine. The silence grew heavier, not empty, but expectant. Raymond's pulse aligned with it, steady but strained, waiting for a sign. He thought of the voice, thin, torn, reaching across the void with the last of its strength. He imagined the fear behind that whisper, the desperation of someone who knew they didn't have much time left. Something in him tightened, not out of panic, but out of recognition. He had heard that tone before, once on a battlefield, when a friend lay between life and death, begging the night not to close in too quickly. It was a memory he rarely touched, but tonight it rose without mercy. Max lifted his head suddenly, eyes narrowing as if catching something Raymond could not. The dog leaned forward, his ears angling toward the dark cut of the ravine. A low vibration gathered in his throat, not anger, not uncertainty, but a message. Raymond held his breath. Something was down there, something alive. The desert wind shifted again, brushing past them with the coldness of premonition. Raymond stepped back just enough to steady himself, then surveyed the ground. The tire marks told a violent story. Speed, fear, loss of control. The dust, still unsettled, spoke of seconds, not minutes. The badge lying in the dirt held the warmth of someone who'd tried to hold on, someone who had believed that help might come. He closed his hand gently around the badge, the metal pressing into his palm like a plea. Max's tail stiffened, his stance widening. His nose twitched once, again, then stilled. Raymond felt the shift before he heard it. the faintest hum of life below, a vibration barely strong enough to be real. Max's growl rolled through the night, deep and certain, a sound that anchored itself in the stillness and declared the truth neither of them could ignore. Someone was down there. Someone wasn't gone yet. The dog's gaze locked onto the ravine, unblinking, absolute. He did not move. He did not waver. The message was clear. The night had not taken everything. Not yet. And as the growl settled into the cold air, carrying the weight of a promise and the edge of danger, Raymond understood that this was only the beginning, that whatever waited below would pull them both into a story they had not asked to enter, but could no longer walk away from. The slope changed beneath their feet as they descended, the loose gravel shifting in a rhythm that felt almost deliberate, as if the earth wished to warn them before they reached what waited below. The moonlight grew thin, pressed aside by a heaviness Raymond could not name, a kind of cold that did not come from the wind but from the knowledge that suffering had happened close enough to taste. Max moved ahead with controlled urgency, never breaking into recklessness, stopping only to breathe in the sharper notes of metal, gasoline, and something more fragile, the scent of a fading life. Raymond felt each step as a pulse of dread moving through him, old instincts rising with the slow burn of memory. He did not speak. The silence carried weight enough for both of them. The overturned patrol vehicle revealed itself slowly, as though the night were reluctant to expose it. Its wheels were angled helplessly toward the sky, one still spinning with a tired whisper. The roof had collapsed inward like a ribcage defeated by force, and the glass across the ground shimmered in trembling constellations, tiny stars scattered where hope had fractured. Raymond paused, his breath catching as he took in the violence of it. Trying to imagine the moment when motion became chaos, Max did not wait for him. The dog slipped beneath the twisted frame, driven by a certainty older than language. It was Max who found her. A hand first, pale, pinned beneath a section of crushed metal. Then the still form of a woman whose uniform was torn and dusted with the color of the desert. Her lips carried the faint blue tint of someone losing a battle with the cold, or with time, or with both. Raymond knelt beside her, heart tightening as he saw the shallow tremor of her breath, proof that life had not yet released her. Her eyelids fluttered as Max pressed his muzzle gently to her cheek, offering warmth where the night had taken too much. Her eyes opened with the effort of someone waking into pain rather than from it. Relief crossed her features, not in a wave, but in a soft settling, a quiet acknowledgement that she had not been abandoned to the dark. She tried to form words, but could not shape them, her breath rasping unevenly against the silence. Raymond reached for the metal trapping her, fingers searching for leverage as the weight of age challenged him, but determination steadied his hands. He applied pressure carefully, coaxing the frame upward inch by inch, as Max stayed close enough to feel her exhale against his fur. When the final obstacle gave way, Raymond gathered the officer in his arms, feeling how light she was, how cold, how desperately she clung to whatever threads still held her here. He did not know her name, but her struggle told him enough about the will that lived beneath her injuries. Max walked beside them, his steps matching Raymond's pace, his eyes flicking between her bruised face and the shadows that pooled along the canyon edge. The dog checked, her breathing with each rise of Raymond's stride, then scanned the darkness ahead, as though taking responsibility for every inch of ground they crossed. The ridge loomed above them, a jagged line etched against a muted sky, and with it came a sound that did not belong to the desert. Gravel shifted under uncertain weight, scattering in small avalanches that marked the presence of someone watching or wandering. Raymond stopped, feeling tension climb his spine in a slow, cold ascent. The officer's breath hitched against his chest, a tiny plea made without words. Even the wind seemed to withdraw, holding itself at the edges of the moment. Max turned first, his body lowering into a stance carved out of instinct and memory. His tail stiffened, his muscles tightened, and his gaze locked onto a point they could not yet see. Raymond followed the dog's line of sight, noticing how even the night air responded, growing denser, quieter, as though preparing for something to emerge. He shifted his grip on the woman, bringing her closer so her weight rested more securely in his arms. The smell of dust and iron filled the space between breaths. Raymond listened hard, trying to distinguish threat from mere presence. The steps above were hesitant, sometimes stopping entirely, sometimes sliding just enough to betray nerves or injury. This was not the gait of someone confident or hunting. It held uncertainty, the uneven rhythm of a person who didn't know where safety lived anymore. Max's ears twitched once, then steadied, and a soft rumble grew in his chest. Not a warning, but readiness. Then the voice arrived, drifting down the slope like a lost bird unsure where to land. "Hello? I need help too." The words carried no edge of malice, only the hollow ache of someone caught between fear and hope. Raymond did not answer immediately. His breath lingered in his lungs as he weighed the shape of the moment, aware that the desert rarely offered simple truths. The voice trembled again in the distance, softer this time, as if the speaker were afraid their plea might vanish before reaching another human ear. Max did not growl. Instead, he glanced back at Raymond, eyes reflecting a question deeper than caution, an invitation to listen with more than fear. Raymond exhaled slowly, feeling the significance of the moment settle around them. The officer in his arms murmured something too faint to understand, but the tone held the same vulnerability as the voice above. For a heartbeat, the night seemed to wait for him to choose which story he would follow first. The broken woman he carried, or the unknown soul hidden by the ridge. The air shifted once more, brushing against Raymond's cheek with the faint scent of blood. Fresh, human, neither male nor female in its signature. He recognized the metallic tang instantly, and his muscles tensed with it. Max stepped forward, nose raised, confirming what Raymond sensed. The dog's posture changed ever so, slightly, not toward aggression, but toward alertness, sharpened by empathy. It was the posture of an animal that had seen suffering in many forms and refused to ignore it. Raymond adjusted his grip on the injured officer, whispering more to himself than to her. "Hold on." It was one of the two sentences he allowed himself. He looked upward, toward the place where the voice came from, and felt the weight of the evening settle over him like a decision pressing against his ribs. Max moved closer to the ridgeline, but did not advance beyond where Raymond could follow. Loyalty anchored him, even as instinct urged him onward. As they waited, the gravel shifted again above them, lighter this time, almost timid. Raymond imagined a young face, frightened eyes, dust-coating clothes that were never meant for such terrain. Whoever was up there was not moving like someone dangerous. They moved like someone who had run out of places to go. The canyon absorbed the uncertainty and returned it in an echo that felt too human to ignore. Max's head tilted, the moonlight catching the faint scar along his muzzle, a reminder that he too had survived nights when danger disguised itself as desperation. The dog's breath steamed gently in the cooling air as he listened. Raymond felt the murmur of connection forming between them, the old bond between man and animal that allowed them to share meaning without words. Another plea drifted down, barely audible, softer, smaller, afraid to repeat itself. Raymond felt a familiar tug in his chest, a nudge from the part of his spirit that had not yet surrendered to the idea that some people are beyond saving. The weight of the woman in his arms reminded him that second chances were fragile things, but they mattered. Max's gaze held steady, urging him toward the same conclusion. The night did not grow darker. It simply waited. And somewhere above them, hidden by the broken ridge, a stranger's silhouette shifted, neither friend nor foe, only lost. The first thing Raymond noticed was the sound of breathing. Thin, uneven, too young to belong in a night like this. It drifted toward him on a shift of wind, carrying with it the faint scent of dust and cold sweat. Something in that sound pried open an old door inside his memory, the kind he thought had rusted shut, the soft panic of a recruit hiding under broken concrete, the trembling inhale of a boy who had survived more than any child should. The ridge seemed to hold its breath with him as he turned toward the shadows. From between two boulders, a shape detached itself from the darkness. The boy emerged slowly, like someone afraid the night might swallow him again if he moved too fast. His frame was slight, barely more than bones wrapped in exhaustion, and his clothes drooped from him as if they remembered a warmer body that no longer existed. Dust clung to him as though it had claimed him for its own. The moon touched his face only in fragments, but it was enough to reveal eyes that had stopped belonging to childhood some time ago. Max didn't growl. Instead, he stood with a stillness that was sharper than any sound, studying the boy, mirroring a kind of silent assessment only creatures who have known fear intimately can share. His ears shifted, not toward threat, but toward understanding. Raymond recognized that posture, the slight lean forward, the careful inhale. Max had looked at him the same way the night they met, cautious, wounded, deciding whether to trust or retreat. The boy tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat, scraping out in fragments rather than sentences. Raymond watched his lips form shapes the air struggled to carry, and he felt the ground beneath his boots loosen, not from the slope, but from the ache of recognition rising deep in his chest. This child was running not from a single danger, but from a chain of them, each link colder than the last. The kind of running that stripped a person of more than breath. Raymond took one step forward, slow enough to show he meant no harm. Max remained between them, not guarding one from the other, but holding them all within a fragile circle of understanding. The dog's posture softened with each heartbeat, and the boy's trembling eased just enough for his words to escape. "My name is Mateo." The name hung in the air, light and breakable. Raymond repeated it silently, letting it settle next to the fragments of stories he had lived, the ones he still carried under his ribs like old shrapnel. Mateo's eyes darted not to Raymond, but to Max, as though the dog were the only creature here who might believe the truth he carried. Piece by piece, the story spilled out, half-whispered confessions, punctuated by shivers that seemed to come from a place far deeper than cold. Men with rifles had promised safety. They had spoken of crossing, of deliverance beneath the stars. But promises fracture easily in the desert, and Mateo had been left behind when fear overtook greed. He had waited until silence grew too loud, until the dark pressed too close, and then he had run toward the only flicker of hope he could find. Raymond listened with his jaw clenched, not from anger, but from the ache of familiarity. The imagery of abandoned hope, cold nights, empty assurances, settled over him like an old uniform he never meant to wear again. He saw pieces of himself in the boy, the loneliness after combat, the feeling of being discarded by a world that moved on without him, the fear of trusting light after too much darkness. Scars calling to scars, not always visible, never truly quiet. A tremor passed through Max. It wasn't fear, it was recognition. The dog's gaze flicked from Mateo to Raymond, as though he sensed the invisible thread tying their wounds together. Max stepped closer to the boy, not enough to touch, but enough to offer presence, a small, wordless assurance. Mateo's shoulders loosened, and for a heartbeat, he looked less like a ghost wearing a child's shape. Raymond lowered himself to one knee, feeling the familiar twinge in joints that had endured too many years and too many burdens. He did not speak. Words were too heavy, too permanent. Instead, he let the quiet carry what compassion he could not voice. The desert had strange rules, and one of them was this: sometimes silence conveys truth far better than sound. Behind him, Lena shifted in his arms, her faint groan slicing through the moment. Mateo startled, stepping back on instinct, but Max's soft chuff held him in place. The boy's eyes widened as he saw the injured officer, and something like guilt or fear flickered across his face. Not guilt for what had happened, but for surviving it when someone else had not been spared. Raymond adjusted his hold on her, the weight of responsibility settling onto his shoulders with familiar gravity. He opened his mouth to offer the boy reassurance, but another sound cut through the canyon before he could speak. A sharp pull in the air, a tension that did not belong to the wind. Max's head snapped toward the west ridge. No hesitation, no confusion, only certainty. The shift in the dog's posture rippled through Raymond's nerves like an old reflex awakened. His spine straightened. His chest tightened in that precise, terrible way he remembered from battlefields. Those moments when the world held still because it knew violence was drawing breath. Max stepped ahead of them all, planting himself between the humans and the darkness gathering on the ridge. His hackles lifted one by one, a slow, deliberate rise like a warning cresting through his body. Raymond felt the air thicken. The desert quieted, as if listening for the next move. Mateo froze, his features shaped by both terror and wonder, staring at Max as one might stare at a creature who could smell what people tried to hide. Somewhere deep within Raymond, a memory stirred, the memory of Max after the war, flinching at distant thunder that wasn't thunder, pacing the walls of Raymond's home for hours because danger had once trained him not to trust silence. He remembered the long nights it took to coax the dog back from the edge of instinct, how both of them had learned to breathe again by mirroring each other's resilience. Now that old ghost has returned. Max drew a breath that was too still to be natural, the kind of breath taken not for survival but for assessment. Raymond felt his pulse sync with the dog's, the way it always had when uncertainty walked too close. Mateo's thin fingers curled over the fabric of his shirt, searching for any anchor in the growing unease. Then, the night shifted. A distant crunch, a stone tumbling where no creature should be. The soft, unmistakable signal of approaching footsteps. Raymond's heart hammered once, deep, controlled, before slipping into calm the way a seasoned soldier does when instinct takes over. He adjusted his stance, shielding both Lena and the boy without thinking. The sky seemed to draw its edges tighter, as if preparing to witness what came next. Max's body coiled, not in fear, but in readiness. The rise and fall of his chest slowed. His gaze cut through the dark as though it could peel back layers of night to expose whatever moved beneath. And then, something happened. something rare, something Raymond had not heard in years, something that felt like a verdict delivered by the dog's very soul. Max barked. Once. Sharp. Commanding. A sound not of warning but of truth. Something was coming. The wind thickened first, gathering grit from the canyon floor and spinning it into a thin, biting veil that stung the skin and blurred the ridgelines. It wasn't a storm yet, but the desert had begun shifting its weight, warning them with a low, uneasy hum that the night was about to turn. The air grew heavier, colder, carrying the dry scent of fossilized earth, as if the land itself knew danger was threading its way toward them. Raymond adjusted the woman in his arms, feeling her breath flutter against his sleeve like a failing ember. Mateo clung close behind, each step small and trembling, while Max stood alert, ears forward, body taut with instinct far older than the fear gathering around them. The first engine growl rose through the dark like a buried thunder, slow, deliberate, and hungry. It rolled along the canyon walls, swelling into something larger as headlights cut through the night, sweeping over stone with the precision of searching hands. The beam caught the edge of the overturned patrol car in a fleeting halo, then slid toward their hiding place, grazing the rough canyon surfaces where shadows stretched and recoiled like living things. Raymond felt Lena tense, her pain breaking through what little strength she had left. Mateo stiffened as well, eyes widening with the kind of panic born from too many betrayals in one lifetime. Max didn't wait. He nudged Raymond's leg with a sharp, decisive pressure, an urgent command rather than a plea, before bolting toward a narrow break in the canyon wall. The path was barely visible, a thin fault line between slabs of rock, something only a creature who understood survival on a primal level would have recognized. Raymond's heart kicked hard against his ribs. He shifted Lena higher, murmuring nothing, because words felt too heavy and too fragile for the moment. Mateo staggered after them, every uncertain footstep scattering loose stones that clattered like warning bells. The cut in the canyon tightened quickly, funneling them into a corridor of stone that swallowed sound and breath alike. Raymond felt the rocks close around them, cold and unyielding, as though the earth itself were testing their resolve. Behind them, the engine's growl grew sharper, bouncing off the canyon walls in shards of sound that pricked at Raymond's nerves. Every instinct told him to hurry, but the weight of Lena in his arms forced patience, forced care, every step a calculated gamble between haste and protection. Halfway through the passage, the ground shifted, just a tremor at first, then a sudden crumble beneath Raymond's boot. Dust exploded up as the earth gave way, sliding under him like sand shaken loose from a dying structure. Raymond's balance vanished. He lurched sideways, Lena sliding with him, her body limp in his grasp. For a heartbeat, time lost form. The canyon tilted. The world narrowed to a thin line of light slicing through darkness. Raymond clawed at the rock wall, fingers, scraping stone, but gravity had already begun its pull. And then, Max. A blur of muscle and instinct, the dog lunged backward, jaws clamping onto Raymond's sleeve with a force born not from desperation, but from devotion. His paws dug deep into the shifting ground, claws scraping against stone as he anchored them both. The strain rippled through Max's shoulders, through his spine, through every fiber of a body that had once endured war and loss at Raymond's side. The dog's breath hitched, low but steady, as he pulled inch by inch, until Raymond regained footing and pressed Lena back against his chest. It was not strength that saved them. It was loyalty, unyielding and irrational. the kind that defies logic and rewrites fate. Raymond met Max's eyes in the dim light. There was no panic there, only a steady, unwavering insistence. Stand. Keep going. I'm with you. For a moment, the past overlapped the present. Another night, another narrow escape. Another version of Raymond who had nearly let go of the world. Max had hauled him back then too. Not with teeth, but with presence. With a fierce devotion no human had ever offered him. That memory pressed like a warm hand against the cold edges of Raymond's fear. They moved again, this time bound not just by necessity, but by the wordless agreement forged between souls who had survived different wars, yet carried the same scars. Mateo followed, still shaking, but with a new flicker of resolve shaped by what he had just witnessed. The canyon exit began to reveal itself ahead, a vertical slit in the dark, sharp-edged and narrow, like the throat of a doorway that allowed only one chance of passage. Beyond it, faint starlight glowed as if promising breath after suffocation. But the voices caught up to them. Not close, yet close enough. Not cruel, yet raw with fear. Men shouted behind them, their words fractured by panic, bouncing in splinters along the canyon walls. These were not hunters chasing prey. These were the hunted, men running from consequences that had finally gained shape, their desperation rising like the dust being kicked under their boots. Mateo flinched at each echo, pressing himself against the rock as though trying to disappear into it. Raymond felt Lena twitch weakly in his arms, her body responding to the nearness of danger even through shock. He tightened his hold, whispering only one line, one of the two sentences he would allow himself tonight. Stay with me. Not loud, not commanding, just steady, like an oath. Max pressed ahead, weaving through the tightest points of the canyon with agile precision, pausing only to glance back and ensure they followed. The dog's fur bristled with the electricity of instinct, his movements sharpened by the tension of sensing danger approach from multiple directions. His silhouette shifted from guardian to guide to sentinel, all in the space of a few breaths. They neared the canyon's end when the air changed again, grew thinner, sharper, vibrating with a familiar hum. Raymond felt the sound before he heard it, a deep rhythmic thump carried through the rock like a mechanical heartbeat. He froze, recognizing that vibration from too many nights spent under foreign skies. The desert wind parted for it. Even the echoes of shouts behind them faltered. The thump grew clearer, rhythmic, distant, cutting clean through the dark. A helicopter, moving fast, searching, help or another danger. In the desert, the line between the two was razor thin. Raymond reached the canyon's mouth just as Max stopped dead. The dog's body stiffened, ears pricked to full height, nose lifted toward the starlit gap above. His tail locked, muscles bunching beneath his fur. The helicopter's pulse trembled through the air, scattering dust in tiny spirals around them. Max's gaze cut upward with an intensity that made Raymond's breath still. The dog wasn't just listening. He was interpreting, hearing what no human ear could separate, sensing intention before the machine even appeared. Raymond waited, heart caught between hope and dread. The night held itself taut, and Max did not move. He simply stared into the sky as if the truth, whatever it was, had already reached him first. The canyon was strangely quiet after the bark of the helicopter blades faded into a steady hum, as if the night itself had paused to take a long breath. Dust settled in thin ribbons, drifting like ash over the footprints and skid marks carved into the desert floor. For the first time in hours, there was light not born of panic. Clean, steady beams from the search helicopter circling overhead. slicing the darkness with purpose. Raymond stood still beneath it, feeling the illumination fall across him like absolution, gentle as snowfall, heavy as truth. Max stayed at his side, chest rising and falling with disciplined calm, though his fur trembled faintly from the adrenaline still burning beneath the surface. The dog's shadow stretched long behind him, firm and anchored, as though the earth itself had decided to draw a line around them. Protection made visible. Raymond knew that stance. It was the one Max saved for nights when the world wasn't just dangerous, but fragile, when a man's choices might decide whether dawn ever came. Then the searchlight widened, and the world shifted. Border Patrol agents began descending the ridge with crisp precision, boots striking stone in measured rhythm. There was no hostility in their formation, no reckless haste, only the kind of controlled urgency Raymond had once used himself in another life, in places where every step could cost a man more than blood. Their flashlights swept over the canyon floor, over broken equipment, over the tracks that told the story the night had tried to hide. When the agents spotted the silhouettes of Raymond, Mateo, and Max, they stopped, not out of fear, but respect. Max stepped forward, tall, poised, a sentinel carved from instinct and loyalty. His tail held level, his shoulders squared, his gaze unwavering. It was not a challenge. It was a statement. They are under my protection. Dogs speak a language armed men trust faster than shouted commands, and the agents responded accordingly, lowering their weapons, slowing their breath, giving the dog the dignity of space. Raymond lifted one exhausted hand, palm open. "She needs medical evac," he said, voice ragged with wear. "The boy, too." His one allowed line. The agents moved instantly. Two rushed toward Lena, who lay limp but breathing in Raymond's arms. Her eyelids fluttered as they lifted her onto the gurney, and for a moment, just a heartbeat, her fingers found Max's fur. They curled into it, releasing only when the straps tightened across her chest and the medics wheeled her toward the helicopter's open bay. Mateo stood nearby, wrapped in a silver shock blanket handed to him by another agent. But the trembling that overtook him wasn't from cold. It was relief, the kind that steals a child's strength because it pours hope into spaces where hope hasn't lived in years. His wide, dark eyes followed every movement around him, trying to reconcile that the hands reaching for him were gentle, not grasping, helpful, not cruel. Behind them, the smugglers were herded into a line, not with violence, not with shouting, just the quiet inevitability of law meeting consequences. They did not resist. Their shoulders slumped, their gazes hollowed out, and their steps carried none of the defiance Raymond had expected. Only resignation. One man, older than the others, his face etched deeper by regret than danger, paused as an agent took his arm. His voice cracked like a stone breaking open. "I didn't mean to leave the boy," he whispered. "I didn't want more blood." The canyon carried his confession, soft but unmistakable. It echoed off the walls, not triumphant, not vindictive, just clear. A kind of justice that didn't roar, but nodded. Raymond exhaled. The breath left him so suddenly his knees buckled. He dropped to the ground, palms sinking into the cold sand. Sand that still held heat from the fight for survival earlier in the night. He felt the tremor in his arms, the exhaustion washing over him in waves, pulling every buried memory from his chest, like driftwood dragged up by a receding tide. Max approached quietly, not with leaps, not with frantic joy, with intention. He pressed his head beneath Raymond's chin, slowly, firmly, the gesture he used rarely, reserved for the moments when a heart forgot it was still beating. Raymond froze, then allowed himself to lean into the dog's presence. The familiar scent of dust, fur, and a lifetime of loyalty washed over him. In that stillness, something inside him unlocked. He remembered the shelter years ago, the dim fluorescent lights, the paperwork he had signed with hands that still shook from war. He had believed he was saving Max, rescuing him from a cage, from abandonment, from a world that didn't make space for broken things. He had been wrong. Max had saved him from nights too quiet, too dark, saved him from the hollow ache that echoed when memories pressed too hard, saved him from forgetting how to trust the night, how to breathe without flinching for danger. Raymond closed his eyes as the realization washed through him, late but true. The helicopter's rotors spun harder, wind whipping around them. Lena was already aboard, medical gear humming. Mateo was next, hand clinging to the blanket as though touching the first warm moment of his life. As Raymond stood to join them, Max nudged his leg once more, gentle, patient, guiding him toward the future the dog had refused to abandon. Then Lena's voice cut through the roar. "Raymond, look!" She was pointing at the ground just beneath the helicopter's floodlight. The beam revealed something half-buried, a badge. Or rather, half a badge, cracked clean down the middle, its broken edge jagged like a wound. She whispered the only other line allowed for her. "What does that mean?" Raymond stared at it, the pieces fitting together in his mind far too quickly, far too clearly. One badge had been found earlier. This was its twin. 2 agents, 2 stories. One truth still missing. A cold realization settled into Raymond's bones. This wasn't over. Not even close. The canyon, for all its illumination, had only shown them the beginning of something larger, something that had been waiting in the dark long before they arrived. And Max, still standing tall beside him, seemed to sense it too. Morning arrived softly, placing its warmth on the desert, as though someone had laid gentle hands on shoulders bruised by a long, unforgiving night. The sky was pale gold, washed clean of fear, and the wind moved as if testing a world newly allowed to breathe. Raymond stood outside the medical tent with his hands in his pockets, his breath calmer now, the weight on his chest loosening for the first time in years. Max sat pressed against his leg, posture still alert, but eyes softened by the quiet that follows survival. Around them, the canyon no longer felt like a wound. It felt like a place that had remembered how to forgive. Inside the tent, voices murmured in low, measured tones, the kind used when speaking to someone stepping back from the edge. Lena rested on a stretcher propped at an angle, pale but present, her gaze lingering not on the wounds she carried, but on those who had refused to leave her. She watched Raymond and Max with gratitude that lived beyond words, the kind that forms only when someone meets you at the border between life and loss and chooses not to turn away. When the breeze lifted the tent flap, sunlight slid over her face, and she closed her eyes, letting it stay. Sometimes healing begins not with medicine but with the simple proof of a gentler morning. Mateo approached from behind, steps light and unsure, cradling a cup of warm broth between his hands as though it were something sacred. His clothes hung neatly now, dust brushed away by hands that cared, but the tremble in his shoulders betrayed how new safety still felt to him. He stopped beside Raymond, glancing down at Max for permission before speaking. His voice was thin but whole, carrying its own small courage. Will you two stay in town?" he asked, a question layered with hope and the fear of being left behind again. Raymond looked down at Max, letting the silence settle long enough to let the choice feel real. The dog lifted his gaze, steady, gentle, the same look he had given Raymond years before when the man had reached the darkest bend in his own life. There was no bark, no dramatic gesture, just the quiet certainty of a creature who had already decided what mattered. Raymond nodded, his voice low and warm. "We'll be around," he said, as though offering not just time but belonging. In the distance, the wrecked patrol car glimmered under the rising sun. Its metal, hammered by the crash, reflected the light like a scar that refused to hide. Yet it gleamed with the strange beauty of something that survived the night. It stood as a symbol, not of danger, but of the lives the night had tried and failed to take. A reminder that some tragedies turn into anchors, marking the place where people choose each other over fear. Max nudged Raymond's hand then, guiding it gently until the man's palm rested on his head. The gesture was small, unassuming, but it steadied Raymond more deeply than any word could. It reminded him that he was not walking the world alone, that loyalty, when rooted in understanding, could hold a man upright even when the past tried to bend him. Max leaned into the touch, breathing slow, as if syncing his heartbeat to Raymond's in a quiet promise neither of them needed to speak aloud. The wind swept along the canyon walls in a warm, lingering drift, carrying with it the faint scent of dust, sagebrush, and something softer, the fragile hope that rises after a night that has taken everything except the will to keep going. Raymond lifted his face to the sun, letting the light reach the creases time had carved there, and felt something inside him unclench. It wasn't a triumph. It wasn't a relief. It was simply the knowledge that survival had meaning only when shared. He opened his notebook, the same one filled with years of unsent letters and half-formed attempts at forgiveness. The pen hesitated in his hand, then settled into motion with a clarity the night had not allowed. He wrote the only sentence that felt true. Some nights don't ask for heroes. They simply ask that we don't leave each other behind. When he set the notebook down, the page fluttered in the light breeze, as if agreeing. Beside him, Max exhaled a long, steady breath and lowered his head across Raymond's boot, a quiet claim to the man he had chosen long ago. The sun edged higher, warming fur and skin alike, weaving their shadows into one. Around them, the canyon brightened, its harsh lines softened by the early light, its silence no longer heavy but whole. The world did not roar in celebration. It simply allowed them to stay. And for Raymond, for Max, for the boy who had found safety, and for the woman who had been carried back from the edge, the light remained. And that was enough. There are nights that linger long after the danger has passed, not because of what was faced, but because of what was found in the quiet that followed. In the stillness of morning, when the world finally loosens its grip, we begin to understand the weight of loyalty carried without complaint, the courage that rises without being asked, and the small, steady kindness that keeps a weary heart moving forward. These aren't loud things. They don't demand attention. They simply stay, like the warmth left in a chair after someone dear has stood up. And maybe that is why certain moments remain with us. They remind us that even in the harshest places, something gentle can survive. Some stories don't end when the mission does. They stay in the breath we take afterward, in the way we look at the world a little softer, in the quiet hope that tomorrow might meet us with open hands instead of closed doors. If this story found its way to a quiet corner of your evening, I hope you'll return sometime. There are always more gentle tales waiting to be heard.